Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Cathedra webinar. We are coming to you live on January 6th, 2026. This is our first webinar of 2026. Very exciting. If you are an NLC webinar first timer in the room, know that our Cathedra webinars get their name from the Creek word for learning. And today you're going to be learning about energy workforce development and capacity building from your instructors, Mike Stevenson and Stephanie Bostwick. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're also thrilled that you could tune in for the webinar with us today. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. And we also have our copyright infringement law printed here. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Moving forward, if you want to share today's webinar or revisit the recording, maybe look at the presentation slides or go through any of the other courses that we've hosted here on the learning platform, you can find all of that in the courses section. I have put a link to the presentation slides for you in the chat already. And if you opt to tune in for another webinar in the future, we hope you do. You can always join like you did today by clicking on that green banner at the top of your screen. We do ask that you join with listen-only capabilities. We are recording the webinars, so it just helps to cut down on audio feedback for the recording. And if you've joined and the sound is coming out of the wrong device, maybe you're trying to use headphones, maybe you're trying to use a Bluetooth speaker, then you can pull up a list of your mic and speaker devices by clicking on the telephone icon at the bottom of your screen. You might just have like a headset icon. That'll still pull up a list of your speaker devices if you need to change it to select the right audio output. Even though we do ask you to join muted, we do still, of course, encourage class participation. We want to hear your questions. We want to hear your comments, and we'll rely primarily on the public chat for that. So if you don't yet have the public chat enabled, you can go over to your messages panel and just click on public chat, and that'll open up a chat between you, the attendees, your webinar instructors, and me, the NLC staff. So any questions you have, any comments, any tech support issues that I can maybe help you navigate through, all of that can be taken care of in the chat. Just come down to where you see send message to public chat, type what you'd like to say, and then you can either hit enter or you can click on the little paper airplane button and that'll send it in. If you go over to the shared notes section, we do have a list of important links in there. You can also find a link to today's presentation slides, as well as the webinar feedback survey, a link to our YouTube. A lot of good things are in there. And then if you have joined and your mic is on, it'll be pretty loud. You'll probably be able to tell. You can just come down here to mute your mic, and I'll try to catch it as well. And then if you feel that we missed a comment or a question along the way, feel free to use the hand raise feature all the way to the bottom right of your screen, and that way you can draw attention to it for us. We'd love if you guys tested out the public chat together by introducing yourselves. You could let us know your name, where you're tuning in from. It's always fun to see all the different tribal nations represented. Your work or your role in Indian country might have led you to the webinar today, maybe not. And then your tribal affiliation, if you have one. You might be a tribal employee and you don't have your own tribal affiliation. That's okay too. You are obviously still welcome. We are happy to have everybody. And then while y'all are introducing yourselves in the chat, I just have a quick final note. There is a red menu column all the way to the left-hand side of your screen. You might not have your options expanded. You might just have the icons. But we do want to try to avoid clicking on that because it's going to pull you out of the webinar immediately, and it'll take you to whatever you selected on the screen. You can always just rejoin the webinar again by clicking on the green banner, but I do just want to give you a heads up about that because it can be kind of jarring. And then while y'all are introducing yourselves in the chat, it is with great pleasure I introduce your webinar instructors, Mike Stevenson and Stephanie Bostwick. And Stephanie, I have made you presenter now.
All right. Oki Nixugoax Nistu Nataniku Ikutsianiaki Nim Tutu on Scapi Bigani. Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Stephanie Bostwick. My Indian name is Red Shawl Woman and I'm Blackfeet. I'm an aerospace engineer by trade, spent several years working on satellite systems, but then got into higher education and actually started an engineering program at Northwest Indian College focused on renewable energy and energy sovereignty for tribes. In doing that work, I also did a lot of workforce development and training with our students at the college, as well as with the Lummi Nation Tarot office. We did solar installation trainings, we did microgrid feasibility studies, we did energy auditing, among other things. And so I have a lot of experience doing some workforce development and training with tribes and TCUs. After that work, I was actually hired on to Department of Energy, Office of Indian Energy as the Tribal Colleges and Universities Coordinator. And while I was there, worked with Mike Stevenson here, doing a lot of piloting some of these programs we're going to talk about with tribes and tribal colleges, trying to build capacity within Indian country to get people involved in energy and create more employment opportunities. So I will end my intro there and pass it off to Mike.
Thanks, Steph. Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Stevenson. I'm an electrical engineer, and I've had the privilege of helping tribes across the lower 48 and Alaska pursue their visions for energy development for about a dozen years. I founded Resilient Energy Solutions about a year ago when I left the federal government. With the feds, I oversaw technical assistance with the Department of Energy, Office of Indian Energy, that provided to tribes across the country. Prior to joining DOE, I was with the small tribal energy office that some of you may be familiar with in the Department of the Interior, the Division of Energy and Mineral Development, where I primarily help tribes through grants and technical assistance assess microgrid feasibility and utility formation. Steph and I both just want to say that we're incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to partner with the Seminole Native Learning Center on this webinar series, and very much appreciate Georgette, Brooke, and their wonderful team dedicating 4 different webinars over the next few weeks to energy-related capacity building activities. As a sidebar, Steph and I are usually in the room when we conduct these trainings and have the opportunity to see your faces for feedback. We're grateful to be able to provide this information in this webinar format, but please, we thrive on discussions, and we'll certainly have time to pause for questions throughout the material, but please don't hesitate to interrupt us in the middle of one of the slides. We'd love to have a discussion on these topics rather than just presenting the material. Thanks.
All right, so with that, we'll get started. So you can see here our agenda. We're going to kind of talk through the opportunity again for workforce development and capacity building. And then we're going to kind of talk through some of the trainings that we do with tribes and tribal colleges, and how those can kind of create employment opportunities for folks, and get people in your community more involved in the energy development that you all are doing. So just as a quick overview, again, we'll talk through some of those employment opportunities, what we see as kind of long-term employment for folks, as well as, worker training to enhance skills and add to people's workload or even create side work for folks. And then we're going to kind of touch at a high level on some of the baseline energy education that we provide. Again, over the next few weeks, we will be providing 3 additional webinars on energy auditing, air source heat pumps, and solar modeling. We'll touch on those all today. So if you all are interested in those topics and want to learn more, we will dive in deeper again in those upcoming webinars. So this is just kind of a kickoff for our 4 webinars. And at the end, we'll touch on grant writing and how you can employ folks in that as well, and then give you some resources for technical assistance as well as grant opportunities. So a lot of folks talk about workforce development and capacity building when it comes to energy, but what we've seen a lot of working in Indian country is folks applying for grants and funding and then hiring external contractors to do the work, which is totally fine if that's what you want to do. But what we try to do is provide education and training so that the things that we're teaching folks, they can take over those responsibilities and do the work themselves so that some of that money stays within the tribe and those employment opportunities stay within the tribe. So there are really cool ways that you can partner with Taro and housing and local contractors. If you have a TCU nearby with those students as well, to train people, again, to either do new jobs or to expand their current roles that they're doing. We'll talk through a few examples of that we've worked on and seen. If you all have questions about any of it, again, please interrupt us as we're talking about it. We'd love to chat with you more about our experience and what we've seen be really successful with the folks we've worked with. Again, having your folks train on these opportunities just moves you closer to energy sovereignty. If we're constantly relying on external contractors to write our grants and do the work for us, we're never really moving much more toward that sovereignty or employing folks within our communities to do work that they're totally capable of doing. All right, so any questions before we dive in? Nothing so far. All right, so the first course that we offer to folks, we call it Fundamentals of Energy. And that's when we go into communities, it's typically the first thing that we offer. It's a great course for folks that are in leadership positions, folks that are just community members that want to learn more about their homes, saving energy, what types of energy resources there are. If you already have existing workforce people, in housing, in Taro, it's great for them as well. We're not selling anything to anyone, so we really offer this as a baseline to kind of get everybody on the same page. If your tribe is working on doing strategic energy planning, or if you're farther along and actually diving into energy projects, it's a great way to have a conversation about the different types of energy generation, as well as energy efficiency and conservation measures, to get everybody, again, on the same page, speaking the same language. So even if folks have some experience in energy, it's a really great course. Sometimes having those people in the mix just adds for extra interesting questions for us to answer and for other folks to hear about. But it's a great way to just get everybody understanding some of that basic terminology about energy, understanding the pros and cons of different technologies. We call it the lesser of evils. There's no free lunch when it comes to energy generation, but we talk about the pros and cons of everything. And, it's kind of up to you all as a community to determine what's best for you, based on those pros and cons, and what works great for someone might not work great for somebody else. Really depends on your background and resources available and the decisions that you all make as a community. So again, it's, we're not trying to push anything on anyone, but offering people a chance to learn about what's out there and ask those questions and really understand what they're getting into. So as part of that training, we do kind of a fun little solar kit that we take outside. These panels are very small, so typically what you'd see up on a roof is a 300, or the more modern panels are typically 400 watt panels. These are only about 30 watt panels, so they're very small handheld panels, but they're great for teaching folks how solar works and what the limitations are. So what we do is we hook up this solar panel to a pump, and that pump is able to use that energy to pump water from one bucket to another. On a cloudy day, it's kind of great because you can see the difference between, when that cloud cover moves in over the sun, just how limited the solar generation is compared to when you have full sun. But we also practice shading the panel and just changing the orientation around so that folks can see, how these different changes impact, how that panel is going to produce. So, the direction matters, the angle to the sun matters. And again, if there's a tree shading it or a cloud shading it, that impacts it as well. So it just kind of gets people really seeing how solar works, so that they really understand, there are limitations to it everywhere, but it's a fun little activity that we do as part of that. We also go through, again, all the different types of technologies, and we'll list those here in a minute. We talk about energy storage and microgrids as well, and opportunities for tribes, whether they want to, take on some of the utility responsibilities themselves, or do other work. We talk about that as well, so that people can think through, what's going to work in their area. So this is a list of the technologies we talk about. There are others out there, but this is kind of, the main list that people are looking at. So we go through different types of renewable sources. Again, the pros and cons of each. We talk about the good, bad, and the ugly, and then the non-renewable sources as well, just to give an overview of how all these different technologies work. Again, what are the pros and the cons of each? What things you might want to think about if you're thinking about different usages. It's going to be really community dependent, right? Everybody's got different resources, different community sizes. So, again, it's just an overview to help you make those decisions as you're moving forward. This is a great one, especially just for general community members, but for everyone, we go over utility bills. We'll typically ask for people to give us copies of their bills so that we can talk through, the rates that you're paying locally and the different fees that you're getting charged. What we a lot of times do after this course is do energy auditing. So sometimes we'll use a house from the housing authority. And so we'll take those 12 bills, the past 12 months of bills from that house, and analyze those. So you can see that graph on the right. That's an actual analysis that we did with a community. So that kind of lower shaded rectangle is what we call the baseload energy. That's everything that's not heating and cooling. So all of the electrical usage in a household is that base load. And then that turquoise is the peak that you see in the summer and winter. And depending on whether people have cooling or not, sometimes you don't see as much of a peak in the summertime. But if people have both, you'll kind of see peaks in the summer and in the winter. But we'll do some basic calculations with those bills to show people, what is your base load use? What is your heating and cooling use? And talk through what folks can do to save energy and to save money on their monthly bills. So this really helps people understand what they're paying and why they're paying it. There are some really interesting rate structures in a lot of states that we've worked with. And so we talk through those complicated, in some cases, rate structures and what people are paying and why. We recently worked in California, and they had some very high rates and very complex rate structures that we had to go through to help folks understand what they were paying and what they would get if they installed solar on their homes. Again, we talk about regulatory and forming your own utility, things like that, what tribes can leverage as they're doing those activities. And if folks have, whatever the local net metering policy is for if you do attach solar to your home or do community solar, that's really helpful to understand if there are actual benefits in your area or if it's even worth the cost of installing based on that local net metering. And then again, we go through, resources for technical assistance, resources for grant funding, so that people kind of know what next steps are if they're interested in developing energy. Any questions so far?
Steph, I might jump in and add a couple things. So as Steph highlighted, and kind of a common theme today is all of the curriculum we develop is site specific. And so with the baseline, the fundamentals course We spend a great deal of time, as many of you are probably very well aware, tribes have significant leverage over their incumbent utilities. So we really dig into the utility policies, any leverage opportunities that may be present, because that's the market that's essentially just as important as the resource, being able to bring these projects to market. And then we will touch on a little bit of this graph again later when we talk about heat pumps for how we can minimize those seasonal loads.
Right. So now Mike's going to jump into strategic energy planning and what that might look like for you all.
Thanks, Steph. Steph, do you mind muting your mic? Sorry, everybody. Steph and I are on travel this week, and we're actually sitting across the room from each other. We just got to the hotel to participate in the Resilience Toolkit NAHC conference here in the Phoenix area. So if any of you are planning to attend, we hope to catch up with you the next couple of days. So strategic energy planning. This is definitely a topic where I can get on a soapbox and rant for the full 90 minutes. I certainly won't do that to you. We won't belabor SEPs in great detail, but time and time again, we found a truly well-developed SEP is really the cornerstone for energy development in Indian country. And we just wanted to touch on a couple of slides to provide some background should you consider pursuing an SEP in the future. So as Steph mentioned, the fundamentals course, it's a great baseline education tool that we recommend prior to SEP development. So all the stakeholder team is on the same page about the benefits, drawbacks of certain technologies. And again, we spend a great deal of time going over the local landscape in terms of the utility and how potential projects can be brought to market. We have our process for SEP development highlighted on this slide, and I'm not going to go through all 11 steps, but it's really important to note, aside from a facilitator having their process, that you're working with a facilitator that is simply able to adapt their process to fit your needs and ensure the exercise as a whole is successful for your tribe, or if it's your housing authority or a TCU or whatever the entity is that's performing that effort, that they really adapt to a metric that works well for you, both in-person, hybrid. It's really important to have that stakeholder participation. And as we all understand, everybody has unique needs when it comes to getting these things done in the right way. Next slide, please, Steph. Speaking of when an SEP is done in the right way, it's very labor intensive for both the tribe, particularly the energy champion that's able to really rally the stakeholders and have enough juice in the community to ensure the stakeholder participation, and the facilitator. Like I mentioned, you really want to have adequate stakeholder representation so the plan captures the true energy vision of and goals of the tribe or whichever organization's completing the plan. The feds, really did kind of a disservice, in my opinion, when they required a strategic energy plan associated with many of the energy funding that they had available from both the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And what that did is, many folks hired contractors to essentially pencil whip strategic energy plans. Some consultant was happy to take money and conduct a plan in some back room that maybe one or two people participated in, and that's not really a strategic energy plan. It's the same thing in name alone. The true exercise and the true benefit of the plan is really having these stakeholders all in the room together. And folks, we tend to get in our own silos, and to really get that communication flowing and really have a broad bought in end result, so these things can survive administration changes and don't end up just collecting dust on a shelf somewhere and checked the box for some particular federal grant. It truly is a very worthwhile effort if you have the ability and make time to do it properly. And that's my rant for SEPs. We'll move on. Any questions on any of that before we move into energy audit training? We'll pause for just a sec before we go on to the next one here. Oh, that's a great question. I just saw a question pop up in the chat saying, could you give an example of a good strategic energy plan? I feel that's kind of loaded. A good plan it's different everywhere. A good plan is a plan that gets utilized. You know, I think that part of having a facilitator that's experienced with energy development to be able to set realistic goals and timelines. One of the things that we have on our process for our plan is celebrating the results. And so I think the beneficial plan is one that is realistic and achievable, that the goals are published somewhere where people can see them and it doesn't go out of mind. And people are really able to feel like part of the team that accomplished that, and really celebrating those results, I feel like, are what keeps these things moving. And it's much easier to update a plan than it is to start from scratch. And it truly is a huge investment. And so I don't think I'm dodging your question, but it's difficult to answer. I think a good plan is one that's utilized. There's no set page number on what it needs to be. It's really specific to what the stakeholder team wants. Most of them are fairly thorough, but it's certainly not like a comprehensive land use plan. The thing shouldn't be an encyclopedia either. But I think, again, it's having the right group of people in the room and the right facilitation team to get those goals to where they're difficult but very achievable. Did I answer your question? Probably not at all. That's where it all begins. You know, I think a strategic energy plan, there's so many tribes I've worked with that have taken advantage of solar or whatever opportunities the federal government had available at that time, and developed, you know, a number of projects before conducting a strategic energy plan, and then trying to figure out, do these plans even align with where we want to be? And so I would highly recommend considering doing a strategic energy plan. When you're at ground zero, that is the absolute perfect time to begin one of these activities. And we'll have some resources at the end for different nonprofits and orgs that have funding available that can help sponsor. Yeah, the available energy resources vary a lot, and utility policies vary a lot too. And the utilities are getting savvier and savvier, and these rate structures are getting more and more complex every year. You know, there's some places that we've been recently where I have a very difficult time understanding their rate structure, and I've done this for a living for a long time. They're making these rate structures incredibly complicated, and that definitely weighs into how feasible some of these projects are, purely from an economic perspective, but economics count too, right? You know, and so even when we're looking at projects to add resilience, that compensation oftentimes still plays a big part in the overall project. Okay, well, we'll jump into the energy audit training course. Will you go back to that last slide again, Steph? Sorry. So this course is by far probably one of the most popular trainings we offer. And actually, Stephanie and I, when she was the TCU coordinator and I was over the technical assistance with Department of Energy, we were providing this training in partnership with Connor from Cold Climate Housing up in Alaska for about a year before we decided to leave the feds. And it's one of the reasons that we decided to leave the feds and form our own entities, is being able to provide this training and really seeing the benefit without having to try and justify through political appointees and all the politics of everything. The picture on this slide was from a training we conducted in partnership with Tribal Energy Alternatives as part of their IBT solar training at Blackfeet Community College in June of last year. And we've since taught another one for a different group of folks at BCC, and we're scheduled to do another one in March too. And so the folks where we've had the opportunity, and we've obviously trained at, I don't know, 6 to 10 other tribes across the country as well, but folks that we've had the opportunity to present this material to have really embraced it and seen the benefits of it. Next slide now, thank you. So the audit training is well suited for tribal housing staff. It's almost tailor-made for tribal housing staff, but we have done the training for tribal utilities and TCUs as well. Blackfeet, as we just highlighted, is a unique opportunity where they have the TCU on site, and we found it's really great opportunity for TCUs and housing working together, where the workforce development students are helping housing conduct the audits on the homes. I think we have 5 or 6 slides on audits today, but I also want to mention that we're going to do a full webinar on audits and cover this course in much greater detail on the webinar on Thursday of this week. But it's generally a great way to identify low-hanging fruit for air sealing and weatherization. And you know, these really impact members' monthly bills, and it's typically very little cost in terms of supplies to remedy the issues, and again, makes a really big impact. Another key point for this training is teaching how to collect and utilize the data. And so the data is a very valuable tool as well when it comes to being able to write competitive grant applications and to really be able to demonstrate blower door readings before any of the weatherization work was done versus after, to be able to demonstrate those results. And again, I think a lot of the weatherization related grants don't have this data that people are looking for to be able to really quantify the results that we all know are happening in terms of savings on people's bills. Next slide, please, Steph. So, as I mentioned a little bit earlier as well, the training that we do for this, it's developed from Building Performance Institute's principles, but it's specifically developed for the unique situations that each tribe we work with. We make custom site-specific curriculum for each training effort. Also, not only just the site-specific in terms of utility or housing stock or weather or things of that nature, but relating to who the attendees are. You know, we've had attendees from housing, workforce students, we've had TARO and local contractors attend training, and we really want to make sure that the folks that are attending these trainings are best set up for success in their vision for how they want to be able to conduct audits moving forward. The primary thing with this training, of course, is we want to ensure that everyone can safely conduct an audit and safely utilize the measurement tools necessary to complete a proper audit. We also provide custom checklists for each training course relative to the specific housing procedures, and a workbook where they can document the results, again, to reference back later when it comes to grant applications. Next slide, please. Oh, no, I didn't. So that's a great question. It's essentially is that training. Typically, the training is 2, sometimes 3 days. The ideal situation is we have an empty housing unit. We try and schedule it at a time where there's an empty unit available. We certainly can conduct an audit, and audits are conducted all the time while the residence is in place, but we oftentimes have anywhere from 4 to 12 people, and we prefer not to bombard somebody with 14 or 15 people, including the trainers, in their home. And so where it's abbreviated a bit is it's less on the building science fundamentals. We could always, you know, again, when we work with somebody on this, we really try and assess the needs and the qualifications of the students that are going to be taking the course. And for timing, we've typically been working with housing authorities where we don't go over the full building fundamentals course and are more concerned that the auditors understand how they safely can conduct an audit and use the equipment that's associated with the auditing. But it's derived from and there's no certification, I should mention as well, but it's derived from the same materials for building BPI's building analyst technician course. Did I answer your question? No problem. So the equipment, the necessary equipment for auditing, it's often around $9,000. The blower door is typically around $5,000 of this. You know, so that's typically the bulk of the cost is the blower door itself. Blower doors though are very durable, and there's two types of blower doors. We train off of one exclusively just because it's a little bit easier to learn and work with. But you know, there's thermal cameras involved as well. Thermal cameras are very powerful tools for auditing. They self-calibrate, so it enables us to audit in times of year. You know, typically we would go through, and either the winter or summertime was the easiest time to be able to feel temperature differences, or you've got your smoke pin out trying to find leakage. The thermal camera is an incredibly powerful tool. It allows us to do audits when the interior temperature is very similar to the exterior, and the most comfortable time for everybody, for the homeowner to have their door wide open while we're putting the blower door in place, and the auditor themselves to do all the inspections. You know, it's a very labor saving and efficient way to detect leakage and gaps and air sealing issues. One thing we should mention is most locations will probably need the combustion equipment, but not all. If you happen to be in a location where you have only electric heat, there's no need for the combustion analyzer equipment. We only use those for natural gas or propane appliances and heating. And the $9,000 doesn't cover associated equipment that's often necessary for audits. You know, your ladders, your hand tools, tape measures, things of that nature, which most of the time housing already has on stock, or utilities typically already have access to as well. This $9,000 we'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about resources. There's some entities that we've been very fortunate to partner with, to where the goal is we don't want to teach you how to do an audit and then load up all the equipment and take it with us. It doesn't do any good. So that $9,000 is typically set aside to where the tribe can own and operate the audit equipment after you're trained to use it. And so there's a few different resources that we've been able to use that have helped us cover that with tribes in the past that we'll get into at the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. We certainly won't get into the details on this slide. We'll talk about this more on Thursday. But one of the main learning objectives for the audit course is teaching how to use that blower door measurement and take into account the volume of the home to be able to determine the air changes per hour, which is a weatherization standard. It's how we can quantify how quote unquote leaky a home is. And it allows us to compare homes of various footprints equally. So for example, you know, we might get a really small blower door number, but that still might be a very leaky small home. And, you know, we might have a really big blower door number, a big blower door reading. And if we're on a larger square foot home, it might actually be pretty well sealed. And so that's why we go through the math to be able to determine, you know, if it's at 22 or 25 air changes per hour. And again, that's where we can take that information into grants. If we're able to put some weather stripping and insulation on an attic access hatch and seal up some can lights and some pretty quick and easy fixes, we get that number from 22 down closer to 16, 15, that's great information to be able to put in a grant and justify additional funding to keep these efforts going from our homes. One last piece on that, again, is just that the course has been really well received by tribes we've had the pleasure of training over the past couple of years. We feel it's a great opportunity. Some very easy fixes can make a really big impact on people's monthly energy bills. It changes the way you look at houses. You know, I'm from the Denver area, and we had a bit of a frost the other night, and I'm driving down my street, and one of my neighbor's houses, you know, you can see on their roof where there's 3 pieces of insulation missing, and you know, a snowy roof's a well-insulated roof. And hopefully, taking this course, our students are now looking at things that way too. It completely changes the way you look at homes as you drive by, and there's lots of opportunity everywhere. Absolutely. You know, I think you know, there's some homes, there's significant upgrades needed, right? And I think there's a mix of all of the above. We've recently started working with a tribe in New Mexico that we're doing all of the houses. It's a fairly small tribe. They have a pretty limited amount of HUD homes with their housing authority. And so, you know, we're into some traditional adobe homes and various types of construction. And there's certainly some places where it requires more infrastructure updates. It's not just going to be insulation and, you know, some silicone ceiling around the windows everywhere. But there's a lot of places where I feel like that's overlooked, and it can be a major impact. And in particular, it's the crawl space and attic access. I think we see that predominantly more than anywhere else. You know, whether you have blow-in insulation, and the first time somebody gets up there, they shake all the insulation off and spread it around so it doesn't fall on them again the next time they go up there. And that thing is truly like a highway for thermal heat, and it really makes a huge impact. And another thing that makes an impact is how expensive your propane or electric costs are as well, right? So very small holes in places like California, where they can pay up to 62 cents for electricity, makes an incredible impact. So I think it's very situational, but most of the time there's pretty easy fixes that can make a pretty big difference. And again, you know, you get into older construction, then we start worrying about like asbestos insulation, and it depends on the dating of the house, and there could be a whole can of worms, but we never know until we get in there and start looking. Next slide, please, Steph. All right. Is there any questions, any other questions on auditing before we dive into the air source heat pumps? Is there anybody on the webinar that their staff or their tribe does energy auditing already, or has any auditing that takes place? Yeah, it's you know, it's not quote unquote like the sexy work, right? It's not everybody wants to be a solar installer, and I think we'll probably get into that in the next section where we talk about the solar modeling and training. Sorry, Steph, I've taken your thunder. But everybody wants to be a solar installer, and there's prevailing wages for a couple of weeks, and then there's really no work. And there's a lot of housing stock in Indian Country that really could use some weatherization efforts. And I know that was something that we struggled with Department of Energy, working with the SCEP office there for the state policy on how to get that money to tribes, because it all flows through the states. And I understand that there's difficulties in that part of it. But boy, there's a demonstrated need. We're not talking about building, hundreds of megawatts in a data center. We're not talking about anything that's going to make anybody rich, but we're talking about things that are going to put a handful of people to work for a long time and really make a monthly impact on your members' electricity bill. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it's shocking to see, and I'm not saying the bills are going to go to zero, far from it, but it's really a testament. I mean, it's something that we had noticed when I was working with the feds for years, that we were spending huge amounts of money with grant dollars to put new solar panels on incredibly leaky homes, instead of trying to get these homes more efficient and then being able to size the panels to where we could have probably doubled or even more the amount of homes that needed the energy. We were putting all this new energy on somebody's roof on the leakiest house. And this isn't something that I feel like we're over pitching. There truly is a tremendous amount of saving that can be done. And it's just things, and again, these aren't like poorly built. A lot of the homes that we've been in that are vacant were recently remodeled, and they're all very well constructed. It's just, you don't know what you don't know. And there's some things with like the can lights, and again, the attic access is always, most always, there's not any foam board on the back of it, or staple a bat to the back of it and some weather stripping around the hatch. There's really, truly, typically some pretty easy fixes that people don't even realize how much of that heat from your home is just flowing up to your attic and heating your roof. I think for Amy, some of the air quality we can talk about here coming up with the heat pumps as well. I think that they could be an opportunity to help with air quality. That's another thing that we should point out too before we get away from the auditing, is with that air changes per hour, we still want it to be 5, 6, 7, 8 air changes. You can actually make these homes too tight. And the last thing we want to do is have the house be too tight where that's also impacting air quality, or if they do have a propane or natural gas oven, that the air is able to circulate in that home and get those noxious gases out of there. Wendell, for your question, that's primarily working through housing or the tribes, just because that's primarily most of the programs that I'm aware of. At the state level, at the state energy office, or even the regional, Bonneville Power Administration or the federal government, are operating on a government to government relationship. And so that usually means those money flow through the tribe, and then the tribe typically disseminates from there. But we'd be happy to work with individual homeowners. As I mentioned, if there's a process where we have a training that's set up, there's, I'd say probably certainly not half the time, maybe a third of the time, Taro is involved, and they bring in, locals to be able to participate in the training as well. And that could be really relevant with this next topic that we're going to talk about too. I think Steph and I both think that the air source heat pumps are going to be a tremendous opportunity, and there's going to be quite a lot of deployment in Indian country over the coming years. You may also know them as ductless mini splits. They're very efficient. They're powered by electricity. And what's neat about them is there's a reversing valve, so they're able to both heat and cool. And so the picture on this slide shows the full assembly with the outdoor unit, as well as the indoor head unit and the refrigerant lines connecting the two. A few slides upcoming, we have an example of how the outdoor unit can be installed up high, and it minimizes the refrigerant line length. And that's just one way that we can increase efficiency on these. And so the one point where they can be inefficient is the refrigerant line running externally. As you can see in the picture, I don't know how well it really illustrates it, but those refrigerant lines are insulated, and they're also in like a plastic conduit typically. But in very hot or very cold conditions, that weather is still impacting the refrigerant in the line. And so we want to try and keep that refrigerant line run as short as possible and make the unit even that much more efficient. Next slide, please, Steph. And so this slide shows the size difference between a mini split outdoor unit versus a traditional air conditioner. You know, again, I think that we think that mini splits are going to be deployed on a pretty large scale in the coming years. I don't know that anybody has any good answers in terms of what the current administration in DC is going to ultimately land on, but they seem to not want to support renewable energy development, even on a residential or community level. Again, you know, I've had some conversations with the folks at Department of Energy, Office of Indian Energy, and it's, again, nobody's given us firm answer, but it's seemingly like they're not going to probably support renewable energy. And they will be able to support deployment of this technology. As I mentioned earlier, they're really efficient. To put it in perspective, you know, a ductless mini split will use about the same energy in 24 hours of running that a traditional air conditioning unit uses in about 2 or 3 hours. And so they're very efficient. They run off electricity, which can be good or bad. It's great in the fact that it pairs really well with solar for summer cooling loads, and offsetting the winter heating with solar. You know, that then gets more dependent on local net metering policies, which seem to be changing, not in a way where it's beneficial for offsetting winter heating with solar, because most of the time they're reconciling the credits monthly, and so you can't really bank your summer hours in many places anymore to be able to use them in the winter time. But even without the solar to offset, these things are so efficient that most residents will be money ahead versus what they currently have. And they also provide a really great opportunity for local workforce or contractors because they're relatively easy to install. You know, it takes about a 4 or 5 inch hole to run the refrigerant lines into the house and the condensate line out. It still requires an electrician, but we're working to build curriculum and qualifications to be able to provide the EPA 608 to get certified to charge the refrigerant lines locally. And, you know, again, they can also provide better indoor air quality and comfort for the membership. You know, an example would be minimizing using the wood stove in winter to be able to provide more heat, since these things can cool and heat. And, you know, for a comfort level, it's getting warmer everywhere. We work with a lot of tribes in Eastern Washington that have fairly cheap electricity and have no heating whatsoever. Or I'm sorry, they have heating for sure. They have no cooling whatsoever. And it's getting hot in the summertime. And, you know, some of their elders, some of their membership in general appreciate having the opportunity to be able to cool their living space in the summertime where they currently don't have it. Thanks, Steph. So this slide shows a heat pump external unit mounted high against the exterior wall. So that does two things that help us. It minimizes the lines, the refrigerant lines being run and exposed to either very hot or very cold environments. And it's also very important that we get that unit off the ground, especially if you're in an environment where it snows. So that fan needs to be clear of snow to operate in the winter time. And that's something that we take into account in climates where you have the snow is mounting in a location where there's not going to be the ability for snow to drift against it, just to make sure it's clean and clear and being able to pull in air to properly heat the house. And something with this too is these are pretty simple add-ons in terms of the construction involved to install and get these buildings into a house. And we definitely recommend leaving the legacy heating and cooling in place and putting these in to supplement that. From everybody that we've spoken to, and I know there's folks, I don't know if there's anyone on this call from northern Alaska, but they're putting 850 of these in above the Arctic Circle. And so, you know, a lot of times what the manufacturer puts is the lowest temperature. When we were in Montana recently, they said it was operating fine at 10 degrees cooler than it said it was going to. And, you know, by and large, we're hearing from folks that it's kind of a plug it in and forget it, that there's these things aren't maintenance headaches. They're pretty durable and reliable, and it's not something that you really have to tinker with much. Also, there's in the head unit, there's a fan that circulates the air, and because of that, they'll have ratings on these different pieces of equipment. Say, for example, you know, one might be rated for 400 square feet or 300 square feet. And we recently were visiting with a housing employee in a training we did in California. And she mentioned she has one in her house, and she put just a simple box fan. It's in her bedroom, and she just put a simple box fan by her bedroom door to be able to draw the air out. And she said it very effectively heats and cools her whole living space. And so I think if there's ways to get the air moving, these things can perform a lot better than even the manufacturer has listed on the sticker. Is there any questions on any of that before I keep just chugging ahead? It depends. I think typical, what, Steph, around probably 3,000, 3,000 to 5,000. I can hear Steph. You guys can't, but it's okay. I can hear her. She's seen them for as low as 1,500. It varies. It varies. I think there's also typically a lot of good rebate policies at all levels of government right now. You know, I think a lot of the state energy offices have rebates that are flowing through local utilities. I know Bonneville in particular has a pretty generous rebate package, and that's something that we're working with some local tribal independent contractors with in Eastern Washington, being able to get added to Bonneville's like certified install list, so they can basically get that rebate credit locally instead of paying some off-res contractor to come hook these up fairly easy and take all the money off the res from the rebates. Per unit, yes. Again, it varies anywhere from like 1,500 to probably 4,000 or 5,000. I think so. These have a what they call it's a COP rating, and most of them are around 3. And what that means is it takes 1 unit of energy and outputs 3 units of heat. There are some of these, and I know like Bonneville and some of the national labs, you know, they get really deep on the research, and they're trying to, I think they get some of them up to like 5 or 6, but then the cost goes through the roof. I mean, they're like $30,000 for a unit if you get one that's like a COP 6 of 7, and it's not worth the cost of that at all. So a COP of 3 will save you a tremendous amount on your energy bill, and it'd be very noticeable. And typically, I think on average, it's pretty safe to say around $3,000. That's on this one too, yeah. What? Unmute, please, sorry.
So I see there's a question about cleaning. Typically, you want to clean these like once a year, but it's a process that you can actually, they have kits online that you can order to clean them. So you can actually do it yourself. There's a spray that you can put on there that doesn't even require a rinse, or you can do a more detailed kit that does require a rinse. But you can basically maintain them yourselves, or if you've got these in housing units, have the housing folks come in, you know, once a year and do that cleaning. But it's pretty straightforward, especially compared to like if you had a ducted system in place, cleaning your ducts is going to be a lot more intensive a process than this, where this is something a homeowner can actually, you know, you can watch a YouTube video and do this yourself. Pretty straightforward.
Kimberly, I'm not sure. Did your question get answered? I'm not sure the context of the grant process. Sorry about that. We'll circle back, get that one here at the end. So as part of the heat pump training, we teach how to calculate the potential energy savings, sizing the units for the living space. And so there are also heat pumps where you can hook multiple internal head units to one external outdoor unit. But again, because of how those refrigerant lines run, and we want to keep that to a minimum, typically those need to be in adjacent rooms next to each other, or in some proximity. If there's a bedroom and a living room, or 2 bedrooms, you want them sharing the same wall typically to keep that refrigerant line run to a minimum. You can buy units that come pre-charged with 15 feet, I think, of refrigerant line length. It might even be up to 25. But again, we're working to try and develop training to provide the EPA 608 cert to be able to charge those in-house locally. And there's multiple configurations of these as well. You know, I think most predominantly you're going to see the ones that have the head unit on the upper part of the wall, but they also they sell ceiling units where it's an insert in the ceiling. And again, there's a variety of funding sources and entities to provide rebates for these. The local utility, usually through the state energy office, Bonneville Power, and again, Department of Energy, Office of Indian Energy, seemingly, at least in some initial discussions we've had with them, looking forward to being able to support this in their next deployment grant. The one thing about the heat pumps, it's different from solar. It's not just, you know, we put residential solar and the homeowner doesn't really have to do much with it, right? It's just sitting there collecting energy, minimizing their energy bill for them, depending on whatever credit the utility is going to provide. But this appliance definitely requires some homeowner education to be able to maximize the energy savings. Particularly, you know, like I say, we prefer to leave the legacy heating and cooling appliances in place And so making sure they really understand how to set the thermostat on the heat pump versus their traditional heating and cooling source. You know, if they have their natural gas furnace or electric furnace or whatever the fuel is set to 72 and this thing's set, you know, at 71 to heat, it's never going to turn on and they're not going to realize any savings for it. And so it definitely revolves some really educating the homeowner on how to properly set these to be able to maximize that energy savings. And again, we're only touching on it here. We're going to have a full webinar covering this in much greater detail on Tuesday, January 20th. If you're interested in learning more about them, really encourage you to sign up for that webinar. Next slide, Steph. Thank you.
All right. If you all do have other questions, again, feel free to keep putting them in the chat. We can always back up and cover them if you still have questions on that section. I'm going to talk a little bit about solar capacity building. The reason we developed this training is a lot of folks actually hire contractors to do kind of the upfront analysis for solar before they even apply for the grant for the installation. This is something your own folks can be doing, doing kind of the site walkthrough of the home and looking at initial designs and sizing of the solar arrays. So this is something that we're offering so that, you know, if you've got folks working for the tribe or who want to work for the tribe who, you know, have an interest in this, we would love to see more folks have the capacity to do this. Rather than, you know, if you've got to apply for a grant to pay a consultant and then you've got to apply for another grant to get the solar, this will kind of speed up that process and just train folks internally to understand how to do that and what they're looking for. So one piece of that, again, is site assessments. So that's really just going to the house, looking at the age of the roof, the condition of the roof. You're structurally looking at some different things on the house, and it's really just to make sure that the house is structurally sound to mount solar on the roof. If you are going to mount it on the roof, if you're going to do a ground mount array, you're still going to do a site assessment because you're still looking at the capacity of the main service panel that the home has. You're looking for any shading that might exist on the site where you're going to put that array. So you're always going to go to the home and do a site assessment. And we have a checklist that we walk people through. Again, we do kind of site specific checklists for folks so that, you know, depending on your location, but the checklists are pretty standard in terms of the different things that you're looking for. Again, it's a lot of it is age and quality of construction and just, you know, making sure that everything's ready to go so that if you do get funded to put up a solar array, you don't have to go back and, you know, re-roof and do other improvements before you get that installation going. We also walk through the software. So there's some free software available that you can use to do basic modeling of the solar. Again, if you're going to be applying for grant funding, nobody is looking for, you know, the one-line diagram that your solar installer is going to come up with. But that's all stuff that can happen, you know, once you get the grant funding. And so this is kind of showing you how to use free tools to look at the roof or, you know, if it's a ground mount, again, look at the land and see, you know, what you can fit on a certain size. Basically, the software has maps integrated so that you can go to any location. You know, if a Google map exists, then you can go there and look at the roof or look at the site and basically outline the area and come up with what the generation potential is. That's enough to get you at least a grant application going to get the project funding. Another piece that we put together is just a financial analysis spreadsheet. So this is going to kind of show you the cost of the installation and what the basic payback is. And again, this is a really important document for grant funding. Folks want to see the payoff, the payback period. So even if you're going to get 100% grant funding for the project. That payoff still needs to pencil out for the funders typically. And so we put together those spreadsheets again, customized to your location, so that you can use that for future grants that you're writing. And I will just say, for all of these trainings that we offer, you know, it's not like we show up and train people and disappear. You know, if you've got questions as you're walking through these pieces after we've trained you, you know, we're totally available by phone or email to answer questions, and to keep helping walk people through it so that you feel like you're fully trained and able to do this work, and keep it moving forward. Any questions on that? And again, we'll have a follow-up webinar to talk more about this training. So another one that we offer is grant writing. We kind of developed this when one of the tribes we were doing auditing with, you know, expressed an interest in grant writing. That specific tribe actually, you know, hires a contractor to do their grant writing for them, but there were folks that were working for housing that were interested in the skill, and you know, we would love to see more folks employing their own people to do the grant writing rather than paying outside consultants to do the work. That again, you could be employing somebody locally and building their skills. And so in this grant writing training, we walk through, you know, some of the different pieces of, you know, planning and prioritizing your projects. So if you've got a strategic energy plan, a good one, you know, that should actually be outlining a lot of your projects and prioritizations, and that will really help you with the grant writing. But if not, you know, the first step before you go start throwing grant applications in the pools to really figure out what are your priorities, what do you want to do first. And having even a basic, you know, list of projects and what they're going to cost and what their sizes are can help you look for grants. And we show people kind of how to search for different opportunities that are available. In some states, it's really easy to pair state funding with federal funding because the state has a lot of funding resources available. You can always pair state and federal. You can never pair federal or state dollars. You can absolutely bring in private funding as well. So we, you know, talk through how to search for those different opportunities, and definitely recommend, you know, some of the folks we've worked with for some of the different funding opportunities as well. If you have specific projects, we can talk through places that we know can fund those. And then we go over just common elements of grant writing. Typically, you know, whether you're applying for federal or state or private funding, there tend to be basic elements of grant proposals that you need to have ready. The nice piece is, you know, once you get some of those basic components out of the way, you can reuse them in future grants, and you don't have to keep, you know, rewriting everything every time. You can kind of just modify what you've already got, which is really helpful. So we'll go through those and kind of what folks are looking for and how to craft those sections. And then we also talk through a lot about the data. So again, all of those other sections that we just covered, there's a lot of data collection that happens in there, and that data is really useful for then going after grants and saying, hey, you know, we just audited 10 homes and we, you know, found that we need weatherization on all 10 homes. You know, here's the data to show that. That's going to make it a lot easier to get somebody to fund that work. You've got the numbers behind it to show, you know, what you're looking for. Using that, you know, data from even the solar capacity building, and using that basic analysis to show, you know, this is the payback period, this is what we think we're going to generate. And so we just kind of show you how to tie that data into those grant writing processes, so that you're writing a really compelling grant that's very fundable. Questions there at all? All right. So just to kind of summarize, again, the workforce development and capacity building opportunities. So, we talked through energy auditing, weatherization, heat pumps. These are all opportunities, again, for your housing authority folks, for your local contractors, that, can be doing ongoing work. This is not, a 2-week process like solar installations can be in some cases. This is, if you've got a lot of homes on the res, it's going to take probably, months or years to go through all of those homes and do the proper audits, do the upgrades, and then, do another audit to show those improvements. So this is really great ongoing work for folks. In some cases, we've seen, people at the housing authorities do this as side work on top of their day job. So they're not necessarily pulling away from their existing load. But it's also, something that you can incorporate into your current staff positions if that's something that can be worked out as well. Again, doing those solar site assessments and the basic design, you're just enhancing somebody's skills so that they're able to do that work, and you don't have to go and hire a contractor to do that, just to go write a grant to get a solar installation. But the grant writing as well, this is something that your folks are absolutely capable of doing on their own. You do not need to be hiring expensive grant writers to go and do this work. So these are all opportunities, that people could be doing ongoing work for the tribe and help move you further toward that energy sovereignty. Anything you wanted to add, Mike?
Just the solar piece in particular, it seems like such a big lift. And this is something that we worked with the Office of Indian Energy. The technology itself is so proven, and I don't want to minimize what some consultants, because I do think that there's significant review that needs to take place with the utility policies, but with some of the fundamental stuff, and there's all publicly available tools to be able to check the box for what that resource is going to provide. And it's much more dependent on the utility policies with how that pencils out, and which is where, the economic analysis spreadsheet that we provide with the training is, oftentimes it's a shame to see folks having to wait for that federal funding cycle to get into a pre-feasibility grant, which we have coming up in the next couple of slides talking about those opportunities. But, oftentimes that might take 6 months to apply before you even hear back. And then depending on what's going on in DC, it might be a year before you get that funding. And then a consultant comes in and does work that somebody can really do fairly easily, particularly with solar. As you get into wind and you actually need more specific measurement equipment, it's a little bit more challenging. And, oftentimes, consultants are still probably going to be needed in most places for those types of efforts. But solar, the technology is proven. We've got very good information on the resource throughout the lower 48, and even building into Alaska, really building out the resource itself. And so I know DOE in particular has acknowledged not necessarily needing that one-line engineering diagram that they previously required just to pay an EPC to come in and entirely redesign the thing anyways. So it's fairly low risk too. It's not like the tribe's on the hook for anything that was put in there, because any EPC contractor you come in is going to completely redesign it, because they're going to be warrantying the system. And so they're going to design it with the components they need. So it seems maybe daunting, but it's really not. It's something that's very achievable and can save a lot of time for having to go through the grant cycle to do that work. I guess I shouldn't mute myself. Next slide, please, Steph. So we've got just a few resources on here. This is certainly not an exhaustive list. There's fortunately many good resources wanting to help fund and help sponsor energy related, both infrastructure and capacity building activities with tribes. But we did just highlight a few that we've worked with in the past and are known to be pretty reliable. The federal one, I'll say reliable with, I won't put a lot of stock in that, but fairly reliable. And so we do have the U.S. Department of Energy Office of Indian Energy. They have planning and deployment grants. Their technical assistance is a very great tool that I think a lot of people, it's a bit undersubscribed. You simply have to ask for help, and they're very responsive. And, you know, it's not going to fund a full feasibility study, but it'll fund whether or not it's worth sinking the effort into pursuing a feasibility study. And most of the work gets channeled through the National Renewable Energy Lab, which has a new name now. I forget what the acronym is for it, but same folks that do a lot of the work with them. And then also, you know, they've got a good newsletter. Their email blast is really good. I know when the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act funding came out, it was mandated that all these offices had to work with tribes that had never worked with them before. And Indian Energy was like the melting pot of that. And so most other federal offices that have funding availability want to get on their webinar to advertise that. I think they've got 27,000 or some number of subscribers. So the biggest one that I'm aware of in the tribal energy space. And so it won't fill your email up with a bunch of spam. It's usually pretty relative opportunities, worthwhile subscription. And then the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Division of Energy and Mineral Developments, they have, I didn't put a link, I should have put a link. The EMDP, that's the Energy and Mineral Development Program grant. And so it's pre-feasibility, everything up to construction, but they have a staff that does renewable energy. They've got geologists there, so they'll work for not only just the rare earth minerals, but a lot of work with like aggregate and developing any sort of solid minerals. And then they also have a fluid minerals team, so they also help tribes with oil and gas exploration and seismic activities. And it's not, I should mention, I think the DOE Office of Indian Energy expects their grant to be about $75 million. It probably will come out in the spring. I think they need Congress to pass a budget so they can get that allocation. But I think assuming the budget passes, they're looking about $75 million. The BIA EMDP just recently closed, and it was $8.5 million. But that's 100%. There's no cost match associated with that funding. It's 100% funded. It's typically pass-through dollars. It is a significantly smaller grant program. I think this last cycle they had $8.5 million for EMDP, and then the TEDC grant, that's Tribal Energy Development Capacity, and it was put about as a mechanism for tribes to, you know, pursue terras to help expedite the permitting process. But it's really turned into a great funding source for tribes to explore how they can regulate and look to pursue even potential pole and wire utility operations, the whole spectrum of what the current situation is and what potential leverage opportunities are for getting into forming a tribal utility authority, or understanding if there's rights of way and trespass or any sort of points of leverage that might exist over their current utility. That's a really good funding source for that. It's a small bucket of money. I think it's around $2 or $3 million right now. It's competitive, but also it's those projects typically are desktop and they're smaller studies, so they can actually fund quite a lot of projects with $2 or $3 million. And it's been a pretty effective grant program the last decade or so. You know, again, for the nonprofit side, certainly not exhaustive here either, but we've been very fortunate to partner a lot with Tribal Energy Alternatives over the past year. They've got their TSAF project grant for solar deployment, mostly. They've got a gap funding grant to help cover some of the cost share from the federal grants or any other grant program where there's needed or if budgets have changed. The capacity building grant we've been fortunate to be awarded that with a couple of tribes that sponsored the audit equipment and the training, as well as a couple of the other trainings. And then they also have an energy planning grant for the strategic energy plan. Great grant resources. And then again, we're very fortunate working with Georgette and Brooke and their team at the Native Learning Center, that they're willing to sponsor technical assistance to cover some of these trainings, evaluated on a case-by-case basis. The one caveat is they're not able to purchase the equipment for the audits. It's a little bit too early to speak to, but I'm going to speak to it anyways. Steph and I have recently formed a nonprofit, and we hope to have more information on that at the Renewable Energy Conference the end of January. And we're busy trying to find every resource we possibly can to help be able to provide this training and be able to provide all the equipment necessary for you to be able to complete the work when the training's done. Here's our contact information. Like I said, we'll be in person at the Resilient, I think, what is it they call it? The Resilient Toolbox training. It's NAIHC's putting it on here at Fort McDowell, Arizona, the next couple of days. We will be at the Seminole Renewable Energy Conference the end of January. We have a webinar on Thursday on auditing. We have the solar one next Tuesday, the 13th, and then we have the heat pumps on Tuesday, the 20th. And please don't hesitate to reach out to either Steph or myself. We'd love to meet you in person. Phone call would be great too. And I guess we'll leave this one up and make sure that we've answered everybody's questions. Thanks, Brooke. Yeah, National Laboratory of the Rockies.
No problem. There'll actually be a few representatives from there presenting at the conference also.
Nice. Yeah, I saw Liz Weber, I think, is going to be there. Again, really appreciate everybody's time today. Hope you found it a worthwhile webinar and use of your time. We'll be on for another couple minutes. If anybody has any questions, let us know.
I'm just going to go ahead and do the outro. If anybody's typing in some questions for Mike and Stephanie, feel free to keep going with that. But I did include a link to the webinar feedback survey for you guys in the chat. It's also in the shared notes section. It is an anonymous survey. It's not connected to your email or to your name. I'm the one who pulls them. They just show up as numbers. But it takes about 3 minutes to complete, and it lets us know what's working well, what we can improve upon for the future. And we do share that feedback with our instructors as well. So it helps everybody all around if y'all don't mind taking a moment to do that. As they've mentioned, there will be another webinar on Thursday with Mike and Stephanie on energy audit capacity building. It'll be the same time as today, so 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska. Feel free to check out our other recorded webinars. We post them to our YouTube channel. There's a whole playlist called the Cathedra Webinar Archive. When the recording of today generates tomorrow, that'll be up on YouTube as well. YouTube is a free resource for you to use. So I encourage you to check out that archive. It goes back about 2 years with recordings. And feel free to also check out our other upcoming events. We post about them on our social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. I did post a link to the information page for the 8th Annual Renewable Energy and Sustainability Conference. That is free for you to register and to attend as well as an attendee. So I hope to see all of you there. And then if you are a podcast fan, the Native Learning Center has our own in-house produced podcast, the Hope of Thing, a Native American podcast. You can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we post the recordings with our special guests on YouTube as well. But otherwise, that is all we have for you today, folks. Doesn't look like anybody's typing any questions right now, but I am going to leave the session open so y'all have access to those links, which includes the slides, the webinar feedback survey, all of that. But thanks everybody so much. Thank you to Mike and Stephanie for this amazing presentation. I'll see y'all again on Thursday, but I'm gonna go ahead and mute and leave the chat open for questions. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you all for attending, and we really appreciate all the questions and engagement. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you all for your time, and look forward to visiting with you more on Thursday, if not sooner at the conference. I'll keep plugging that conference for the last 20 seconds. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.